The Tuesday I found out started the same way every Tuesday does, with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of the mockingbirds fighting over the feeder outside my kitchen window. I was 63 years old, recently retired from 28 years of nursing, and finally learning how to be still. I had my garden, I had my book club, I had my son, my daughter-in-law, and the mortgage I'd co-signed for their house 14 months ago, a decision I'd made the way you make most decisions, for the people you love, without reading the fine print of your own heart. My phone was face down on the counter when it buzzed. I turned it over expecting a message from my friend Carol about Thursday's meeting. Instead, it was a number I didn't recognize, a 704 area code, Charlotte. I answered on the third ring. "Is this Sandra Merritt?" The voice was a man's, flat and practiced, the kind of voice that delivers bad news for a living. "It is," I said. "This is Daniel Cruz from Piedmont Asset Recovery. We're attempting to contact Natalie Merritt regarding a delinquent personal loan in the amount of $62,400. Your name appears on file as a co-applicant." I set down my coffee mug. The sound it made against the tile was the last ordinary sound of that morning. "I'm sorry," I said. "Could you repeat the amount?" He did. $62,400. The words didn't get smaller the second time. I told him I'd need to verify the account and call him back. He gave me a reference number and hung up. I stood at the counter for a long moment, watching the mockingbirds like they might offer some kind of explanation. They didn't. My son, my Marcus, had met Natalie 3 years ago at a work conference in Raleigh. She was polished and quick-witted, the kind of woman who made a room feel smaller just by walking into it. I'd liked her energy at first. She was decisive. She seemed capable. She laughed at the right moments and asked questions that made you feel interesting. I told myself my hesitation in those early months was just a mother's instinct for protection, the irrational kind, the kind worth ignoring. When they got engaged, I swallowed what was left of my doubt. When they found the house in Concord, a 3-bedroom colonial, on a quiet cul-de-sac, and Marcus told me they were a little short on the down payment, I didn't hesitate. I co-signed. I wired $22,000 from the savings account I'd built over 30 years of double shifts and missed holidays. I told myself it was an investment in their future. I told myself I was being generous, not naive. Now a debt collector was telling me my name was on a loan I'd never seen. I walked to my home office slowly, the way you walk when you're not sure you want to arrive. In the bottom drawer of my desk, I kept a manila folder labeled Marcus House. Inside were the documents I'd signed 14 months ago, the mortgage co-sign agreement, the title paperwork, the insurance disclosures. I spread them across the desk and began reading each one carefully, the way I should have read every document I'd ever signed for anyone, the way I was teaching myself too late. On the 3rd page of the mortgage addendum, there it was, a clause I'd skimmed past. It authorized additional lending instruments to be attached to the property under both signatories' names, provided both parties had agreed in writing. Below it was a signature line. My name was printed beneath it, in neat capital letters. Above the line, a signature that was not mine. I sat very still for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called my friend Donna, who'd retired from 20 years in real estate law. I read her the clause over the phone. She was quiet for several seconds. "Sandra," she said carefully, "that signature authorizes a secondary loan against the property. If your name is on it and that signature isn't yours, that's not a clerical error." I thanked her and hung up. I didn't say the word she was dancing around. I didn't need to yet. That evening, Marcus stopped by on his way home from work. He did this once or twice a week, a habit from when he was younger and I was his first call about everything. He came in through the back door the way he always had, helped himself to the iced tea in the refrigerator, and sat down at the kitchen table like it was still 2003, and he was telling me about football practice. I sat across from him and kept my voice level. "How are things at the house?" I asked. "Good." He took a long drink. "Nat's been talking about redoing the guest bathroom. Nothing major. And finances? Things comfortable?" He looked up with that particular expression sons have when their mothers ask about money, patient, slightly defensive, a little performative. "Mom, we're fine. I've told you. I'm not worried, I said. Just asking. He smiled, refilled his glass, and changed the subject to his buddy's new truck. I let him. I sat there across from my son, who had his father's eyes and his father's way of making you feel like the concern in your chest was the problem, and I listened to him talk about horsepower, and I thought about $62,000. He left around 7, kissed my cheek at the door, told me he'd call me Thursday. I went back to my office and opened my laptop. It took me 4 hours and 3 separate financial institution websites to confirm what I already knew. A home equity line of credit had been opened against the Concord property 11 months ago. The co-applicant listed was Sandra Merritt. The proceeds, $62,400, had been dispersed in 2 installments to an account I had never seen and could not access. I printed every page. The next morning, I called Donna back and asked her to recommend the best real estate attorney in Mecklenburg County. She gave me a name without hesitating. Philip Okafor, downtown Charlotte, 20 years in property and contract law. I had an appointment by noon. He met me in a conference room, with tall windows looking out over the city, reviewed every document I'd brought, and asked me 3 times in different ways whether I had signed or authorized the HELOC. Each time, I told him no. Each time, he wrote something down. The signature on this authorization, he said finally, without looking up, does not match the signature on your original mortgage documents. I can see that with the naked eye. He set down his pen. What you're describing, if proven, is fraud. Specifically, forgery of a co-applicant's signature to obtain credit. I had known it since the night before. Hearing it said out loud in a room with fluorescent lighting and a man in a good suit was different. What are my options? I asked. He walked me through them methodically. I could file a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I could pursue civil action to remove my name from the fraudulent instrument. I could, with sufficient evidence, pursue criminal charges. He told me that the road would be long and that I should prepare for resistance, not just from Natalie, but possibly from Marcus, whose name was also attached to the property. I drove home with a yellow notepad full of steps, all of them written in my own handwriting, none of them easy. For the next 3 days, I said nothing to Marcus. I gathered, I organized. I drove to the county recorder's office and pulled the full property history. I called Piedmont Asset Recovery back and requested a full accounting of the loan in writing. I contacted my own bank, explained the situation, and placed a fraud alert on my credit file. Every document went into a new binder, tabbed and dated. On the 4th day, I called Marcus and told him I needed to see him. Not a drop by, not iced tea at the kitchen table. Dinner. Just the 2 of us. He arrived on Friday at 6 with a box of my favorite shortbread cookies from the bakery on Main Street, the way he did when he sensed something heavy in the air and hoped sweetness might soften it. I'd made pot roast. I set the cookies on the counter and didn't open them. We ate mostly in silence. When the plates were cleared, I set the binder on the table in front of him. I need you to look at something, I said, and I need you to look at all of it before you say anything. He opened the cover slowly. I watched his face as he read the first page, then the second. His jaw tightened. He turned to the signature page and stared at it for a long time. He knew my signature. He'd seen it on every birthday card, every permission slip, every note I'd tucked into his lunch for 12 years of school. He knew that was not my signature. He turned pages without speaking. The loan documents, the disbursement records, the credit bureau alert, the attorney's preliminary notes. When he closed the cover, he didn't look at me right away. He looked at the window over the sink, the dark glass reflecting the kitchen back at him. She told me you agreed to it, he said. His voice was very quiet. She told you I agreed to it, I repeated. She said you'd called her directly, that you wanted to help, that you'd signed everything electronically. He pressed both palms flat on the table. I didn't think to question it. She handles the finances. I let her handle it. I let that sit for a moment. Marcus, I said, that is not my signature. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, where did the money go? That I couldn't answer yet. but I slid the disbursement records toward him. The account the funds had gone to was not their joint account. It was an account, in Natalie's name only, opened 6 weeks before the HELOC was approved. He stared at the routing number like it might rearrange itself into something explainable. "I need to talk to her," he said. "I know you do," I said. "I'm not asking you to take my word for anything. The documents will say what they say." He left with the binder under his arm. I stood at the front door and watched his taillights disappear around the corner, and I went back inside and sat in the living room with all the lights on and did not sleep until nearly 4 in the morning. The call came 2 days later, not from Marcus, but from Natalie. She'd gotten my number up before I heard her voice, so when it came through, I was as prepared as a person can be. She was controlled at first, the practiced calm of someone who had rehearsed the conversation. She said there had been a misunderstanding, that she had believed I'd given verbal authorization, that the signature had been handled by an assistant at the lending office, and she hadn't realized there was a discrepancy. I let her finish. Then I told her that I had retained legal counsel, that a fraud complaint had been filed with the CFPB, that my attorney had already been in contact with the original lender, and that if she wanted to discuss anything further, she was welcome to have her attorney call Philip Okafor's office directly. The silence on her end lasted about 4 seconds. "You're going to destroy your son's marriage over a paperwork issue," she said. Her voice had changed. The warmth was gone. "Natalie," I said, "I spent 28 years in the ICU watching people lose things they could never get back. I know the difference between a paperwork issue and something that is going to cost my son everything if it isn't stopped now." She hung up. "Within the hour," Marcus called. His voice was tight and strange. The voice he'd used exactly twice in his life. When his father left, and when he'd been in that car accident at 19, and was trying not to sound as frightened as he was. He said Natalie had told him I was going after her. He said he needed me to pause, to think about what I was doing to their marriage. He said he knew the situation was complicated, but that we could work it out privately, without lawyers, without filings. I told him I loved him. I told him I had never once done anything in my life to hurt him intentionally, and I was not starting now. I told him that the money I'd saved for 30 years, the money I co-signed to give him a home, was not something I was willing to pretend hadn't been taken. And then I told him the thing I'd been holding since the moment Donna used the word fraud. "Marcus, I need you to call the lending officer directly and ask them to walk you through the HELOC application. Ask them to describe the verification process. Ask them what documentation they received. Do that before you ask me to stand down." There was a long pause. "Okay," he said. "Just that. Okay." He called me back the next evening. The lending officer, when pressed, had acknowledged that the in-person verification requirement had not been properly completed. The electronic signature had been submitted through a third-party portal. When Marcus asked for the IP address log, it traced back to a device registered in Natalie's name from their home address at 11:30 on a Tuesday morning. A Tuesday Marcus had been at work. He was silent on the phone for so long, I thought the call had dropped. "She did it," he said finally. "Not a question." "Yes," I said. Another long silence. I heard him exhale. "Mom," he said, "I'm so sorry." Those 3 words. I had been waiting for them without knowing how badly I needed them, and when they came, my eyes burned in a way I hadn't allowed them to all week. I sat down on the edge of my bed in the dark and let myself feel the relief and the grief of it at the same time. "I know," I said. What followed was not clean or quick. These things never are. Natalie moved out within 10 days. The legal process to remove my name from the fraudulent loan instrument took 4 months and cost more in attorney fees than I wanted to think about. The civil case is still pending. Marcus stayed in the house, refinanced in his own name once my name was cleared, and spent the better part of 6 months paying down the damage she'd left in the accounts she had access to. People talked. Of course they did. My neighbor, 2 streets over, stopped me in the parking lot of the grocery store to tell me she'd heard I'd turned my daughter-in-law in to the police, which was not exactly accurate, and also somehow my fault. A woman from my former book club sent me a message saying she hoped I'd considered what I was putting Marcus through. I read it twice and did not respond. What they didn't know, what they couldn't see from their vantage point, was what I saw when I sat across from my son at that kitchen table and watched him look at a signature that wasn't mine. They didn't see the moment he understood the shape of what had been done, not just to me, but to him, his trust, his home, the future he thought he was building. They didn't see him 6 months later, on a quiet Saturday in October, show up at my door with coffee and a bag of bagels and sit with me for 3 hours, going through nothing in particular. Just talking the way we used to before he was busy, and I was cautious, and we both got too careful with each other. They didn't see him tell me about the woman from his office he'd started having lunch with, a landscape architect named Claire, who apparently had strong opinions about native plants and made him laugh in a way I hadn't heard in years. There's a pear tree in the backyard I planted the year Marcus was born. For the first 15 years, it barely produced. I almost had it taken down twice. Then one spring it just decided it was ready, and the thing has been flowering every April since, faithful as a clock. Marcus's father once said that some things just take longer to come into their right shape, and you have to be patient enough not to cut them down before they get there. I've thought about that a lot this past year. I was 63 years old when a debt collector told me my name was on a loan I'd never signed. I was 63 years old when I learned that love without accountability is just permission. I was 63 years old when I understood, fully and without apology, that protecting the person you raised sometimes looks like the most unloving thing in the world to everyone watching from the outside. Let them watch. I know what I did and why I did it, and so does my son. That's enough for me.